Morning. Morning. Today, I want to speak on issues that relate to privatization of public sector services. And I know that some of you are probably thinking, where does he want to speak about privatization in this forum? As we know, the topic of privatization is often discussed with respect to when a country is experiencing fiscal problems. And in recent years, it should be no secret, or it is no secret, that there is much talk about privatization in Cayman because we have experienced and are experiencing difficult times with respect to our finances. And when I looked on the agenda for this week of professional development, it struck me that in addition to covering important areas that will help to sharpen your skills and enhance your abilities to carry out your duties, the topics all play an important role in public sector fiscal management and are particularly relevant to supporting the development and execution of policies for successful privatization. Topics such as the role of the Chief Financial Officer, internal controls and risk management, project management, governance concepts, ethics and values, accounting standards, and information technology are all crucial to successful privatization efforts. Furthermore, ladies and gentlemen, you'll find that I'm not your typical politician. I'm very practical. So as Michael said, having studied economics and finance and law, there was absolutely no way that I was coming to speak to a room full of accountants about accounting issues. Therefore, when people mention the term privatization, what do you think they mean by that? And what are the potential advantages and disadvantages that can result from privatization? The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, defines privatization as the transfer of ownership and control of government or state assets, firms, and operations to private investors. The concept of privatization has been embraced and implemented in many countries, from developed economies such as the United Kingdom, France, Germany, and the USA, to less developed economies in Southeast Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean. Privatization at first glance seems very simple, but upon further review, it reveals that it's a very complex matter. Let us look, for example, at privatization in the United Kingdom. The UK experience with privatization has been an interesting one, which proved to have enormous political and economic success and has served as a model for other countries to follow. In the United Kingdom, during the 1980s and under the leadership of Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, the UK underwent a period of unprecedented privatization, affecting virtually all aspects of the British economy. During this period, there was a radical transformation from a central government control model towards a more open, free market economy. This transformation was radical because it moved the United Kingdom away from an economic model that was considered to be the best and was being emulated by developing countries around the world. The impetus for privatization in the UK in the 80s was driven by a need to reform an ailing economy. In the late 70s, the British economy was in disarray, with high levels of inflation, unemployment, soaring government expenditure, and increasing incidences of social unrest. The scale of privatization efforts in the UK were enormous and involved many well-known agencies, such as British Petroleum, British Aerospace, British Leyland, Cable and Wireless, British Gas, Jaguar, British Airways, and Rolls-Royce. The UK experience with privatization has been well documented and is illustrated by 4 examples articulated in a Heritage Foundation paper written by Peter Young and Stuart Butler entitled Privatization, Lessons from British Success Stories. I'll briefly highlight those examples. With respect to public housing, between 1979 and 1986, a concerted effort was made to privatize public housing, and approximately 1 million housing units were sold to tenants. This had a dramatic effect as it transferred persons from renters to homeowners and generated approximately $18 million for the Treasury. That is 18 billion, my apologies, 18 billion in revenue for the Treasury. And I'm using US dollars because, of course, we think in CI in US. The government was lauded politically, while at the same time being relieved of the financial burden of the management, maintenance, and upkeep of the units. The housing market grew exponentially, with banks, retailers, and private service companies realizing huge gains to their bottom line as a result. British Telecom. The telecommunications giant was privatized in phases via public stock offerings that was marketed to small investors. This methodology allowed everyone, management, staff, and customers, the opportunity to participate in the privatization and quelled much of the opposition for what was seen at the time as a radical move. As a result of how the stock offerings were structured and priced, the issue was oversubscribed by 500%, causing stock prices to rise sharply. Once the initial sale was concluded, it was revealed that over 2 million small investors had bought the stock, doubling the number of households in Britain owning company stocks of any kind. The National Freight Company. At the time, this company was Britain's largest trucking firm, but was struggling financially. Its future seemed less than promising, with closure and massive layoffs imminent. The government chose to privatize this company by way of an employee ownership model. In 1982, the employees put up approximately the US 80 million required to purchase the company from the government, effectively putting them in control of their own destiny. The results were dramatic. Within a couple of years, employee productivity increased by more than 30%, and the loss-making enterprise became a profitable one. By 1987, the shares purchased by employees increased. The shares purchased by employees 5 years earlier were worth 20 times their original price. British Leyland. The privatization of this automobile manufacturer became an example to the UK government of how not to privatize. The government attempted to privatize British Leyland by sale to a single bidder. The chosen methodology created distrust amongst the company's management and staff to the proposal and brought no end of political headaches, as the general public saw the proposed sale as being a form of political punishment for the workers. Having heard all of that, you ask yourself, well, what are the benefits of privatization? Having looked at the UK experience, let us now consider the major benefits of privatization. Firstly, there's a reduction to government expenditure. As entities are privatized, the government reduces its expenditure and investments into the said entities and effectively transfers the responsibility to the private investors. This is an important point in that this means the government can take its remaining resources and better focus them on delivering high-quality core government services. 2, improved efficiency and profitability. Privatization drives efficiency as the privatized entities adopt a business ethos and become focused on reducing their operational costs and improving profitability. For the government, it increases efficiency as it reduces the policy, administrative, and operational burdens of delivering certain services and allows the policymakers to focus on core strategic responsibilities. 3, innovation. Once privatized, agencies become more aggressive and innovative with product and service delivery as they seek to lower costs and improve their competitiveness in the market. This produces gains for the overall economy as it supports investment in new technologies and employment. Distribution of economic wealth. Privatization provides an excellent opportunity for the creation of personal wealth among the masses as it gives individuals the opportunity to become shareholders of the companies once they are privatized. This is important for the wider economy as it allows citizens to become owners and direct beneficiaries of an entity's financial success, as well as it empowers them to be active participants in the financial systems. And 5, investment. Privatization stimulates investment in activities based on the business case and model without having to be tied to the financial capabilities of the government. Privatization can also create local investment-grade instruments, which would be attractive to domestic institutional investors, such as pension plans and insurance companies. The question is, when do we privatize? There is no single golden measure that one can use to say exactly when is the best time to pursue privatization. Some of the major considerations are government's financial position, the general economic environment, robust financial systems, product or service delivery versus the regulatory functions, and social harmony within the economy or the country. With respect to government's financial position, in recent years, international financial institutions such as the IMF and the World Bank have pushed the privatization concept to countries that have called on those organizations for assistance in funding their budget deficits and restructuring their operations to improve the net financial position of their government. When a government is experiencing financial difficulties, it can create the impetus for some form of privatization because privatization can generate significant cash windfalls and reduce operating expenditure for a government in the short term. But careful planning must be implemented in order to ensure that these financial gains are not replaced by other forms of operational expenditure. General economic environment. Privatization efforts work well where the economy encourages and supports private enterprise and healthy competition, as well as where workers are skilled and have access to training and educational opportunities which allow them to easily adapt to reforms, innovation, and new technologies. Privatization can take many forms, but one of the more popular methods has involved the sale of shares to individual investors. However, this works best where the countries have well-developed financial markets that can facilitate the easy trading of these shares. So therefore, robust financial systems are also necessary. Looking at product and service delivery versus regulatory reforms. Regulatory functions, my apologies. Any government considering privatization must carefully consider what is actually being privatized. Is it a product or service only? Or is it a regulatory function as well? The privatization of any regulatory function must therefore be scrutinized very carefully, and the impact, as the impact could be far-reaching. With respect to social harmony, a country should have little or no civil unrest at the time of considering privatization, as it is important for the population to have a general understanding and acceptance that privatization is the best course of action for the country at that particular time. Having spoken about the UK and the rest of the world generally, let us look to Cayman. Contrary to popular belief, over the years, the Cayman Islands government has exercised various forms of privatization. One well-known example occurred during the 1960s when the government privatized electricity generation and distribution, essentially allowing for the creation of what is now our sole provider of electricity, Caribbean Utilities Company, or otherwise known as CUC. Therefore, your view as to the pros and cons of any proposed privatization of essential public services in the Cayman Islands may well depend on your view of CUC. Therefore, and you might have figured that I like the word therefore. It is there for a reason, therefore. Therefore, in the case of the Cayman Islands, the benefits of privatization are desirable, but the process must be managed carefully to ensure that we create opportunities for employment, ownership, and wealth creation for current and future generations of Caymanians. However, given the relatively small population of our island, it is very much possible that significant indigenous local participation in any privatization efforts would be limited, and this could compromise the desired outcomes, as ownership and income earnings may be transferred outside of the Cayman Islands. Let us now turn to consider some of those entities or services that are often mentioned as being suitable for privatization. The Water Authority and its sewage services. Cayman Islands Airports Authority. The Port Authority. The Cayman Turtle Farm. Not often mentioned, but also possible. Public Works Department. The National Roads Authority. As of late, our schools. Hospital and ambulance services. Postal services. And solid waste collection and management. As you can see, most of those examples include our statutory authorities, or commonly known as SAGCs, which provide a wide variety of services to the general public and probably present the best potential for privatization opportunities in the Cayman Islands. In the 2013-14 budget, the government is planning to spend approximately 18% of its operating expenditure, or 100.1 million Cayman Islands dollars, to purchase outputs from SAGCs. Government is also planning to invest 47.4% of its capital expenditure, or 24.6 million CI dollars, into SAGCs. Collectively, the SAGCs are expected to generate a net profit of approximately 5 million CI dollars during the 2013-14 fiscal year. In terms of outstanding debt, as at the 30th of June 2013, our SAGCs had an outstanding debt of CI $136 million. The spotlight on SAGC financial performance comes at a time when the country faces enormous challenges of improving its net financial performance to achieve compliance with the framework for fiscal responsibility as set out in the Public Management and Finance Law. Therefore, and there's that word again, in conclusion, privatization is a complex and multifaceted issue, which, if managed properly, can produce sustainable returns for the economy, government, and the people of the Cayman Islands. As we examine privatization in other jurisdictions, it is important that we learn from their experiences, extract the key elements for success while tailoring any planned privatization efforts to take into consideration the specific socioeconomic circumstances of our country. And 3, remembering always that the ultimate goal we seek is to 1, identify what are the essential services to be provided by the Cayman Islands government. 2, what services should be privatized. And 3, if privatized, how are they to be regulated? Therefore, over the course of my term as Minister of Finance and Economic Development, I am willing to consider the potential for privatization of some government assets on the basis that such privatization will not only decrease government's operating expenditure while encouraging efficiencies and supporting economic growth. I also believe that we owe it to ourselves and future generations of Caymanians to do the necessary analysis to determine if privatization of some of our public services is justifiable financially, economically, and socially. Consequently, ladies and gentlemen, I did not speak to you about accounting. I spoke to you about privatization. And in pursuit of any privatization initiative, we will require the support of competent and well-trained technical experts, such as yourselves, to ensure that potential pitfalls are avoided and desired objectives are achieved. Thank you for your attention, and I hope that I haven't bored you with a speech that you were not expecting. And I think I'm supposed to take questions.
Thank you, Minister, for that very interesting presentation. As a child of the Thatcher era in the UK, obviously there was lots of great benefits to the privatisation that took place there and the economic reforms that took place. But I was also aware, growing up, of the social issues it created and some of the challenges that we had in some industries, such as the coal, steel, and British Leyland, which actually devastated some communities and sometimes some reforms that were required, but it was very challenging. In terms of the Cayman context, is there any specific challenges that you see for Cayman privatisation, for example, limited competition and aspects like that, which might make it the issue to try and privatise services a bit more challenging?
Precisely. Hence my reason for saying socially, not just financially and economically, but also socially. If you think that many of the more attractive government services that everyone wants to have privatized are essentially natural monopolies. So when you privatize those, it's quite possible that we're grumbling now because of supposedly high government taxes and efficient delivery of services. Then we may grumble because we can't afford to make ends meet. So we'll have to be very careful in looking at that. And of course, ensuring that we also be very careful as to those whom we regard as being financially capable as successful bidders.
Any other comments, questions?
Going once.
sorry, I'm monopolizing the mic again. Other jurisdictions are now looking at not just those traditional areas where you think for privatization, but looking at things like outsourcing, things like financial transactional functions which should normally be within the entities. Looking at those sort of areas, just outsourcing internal services. Is that something that you would be thinking about, or is that another step down the road?
Perhaps that would be another step down the road. I'm very careful to avoid creating middlemen.
Good morning, Minister. You mentioned about some of the social implications, and I know you went through the statistics in terms of the impact on the government's bottom lines with regards to having all of these various SHGCs that are very profitable. But considering the size of Cayman's economy, just like the economy of skills, do you believe that even in privatization, that for those entities that are privatized to be profitable, that various increases in costs and stuff to them would result in increased rates and stuff to the population, this is a small population, and by extension, then the government has a social welfare increasing costs. So on one hand, we privatize to get rid of those debts, etc. But because those entities to be profitable have to increase their rates, the government in the end then still has a higher welfare cost to basically assist persons who can't afford to meet those high costs.
That's an excellent question. And it relates to, I didn't elaborate in great depth, but I alluded to the point of the social aspects of it. Because monopolies by their very nature are inefficient. They don't have to be efficient. They have no one to compete with. So their sole motive is to operate to make a profit. And if there's no competition, well then to make as big a profit as is allowed. So your point is a very good point, that not just consider what is happening currently, but what could happen if you do privatize something. What is the greater cost?
In the other countries, like you mentioned the UK, there is corporation tax there, so privatization would lead to revenue for the government. My question is, in the Cayman Islands where there is no corporation tax, have you considered any other measures to actually improve government revenue, considering that privatization, as Patrick said, would actually lead to higher costs for consumers?
Sir, I'm a politician now. That's a very dangerous question. It's a good question. It's a dangerous question. That's the answer. You mentioned tax, and you asked if there were other sources of revenue considered. So that's a dangerous question.
Good morning, Minister. I just wanted to ask about the philosophy behind beginning a privatization scheme, whether it is a thinking about whether government needs to privatize as a whole, or whether government is looking at entities that needs privatization. Is it a global looking at it first, that government really needs to privatize something, or is it that government needs to privatize, say, a certain entity, and it needs to do it?
It's more global. It is realizing that we have to control our expenditure, reduce the tax burden on our society, and therefore we can't rule out the possibility of privatization. But we haven't identified any particular service or any particular agency for privatization. Going twice.
More questions? Thank you all very much. Thank you, Minister.